What happens when a woman fleeing a scandal in the polished society of the East signs a contract to become a mail-order bride? She travels 1,000 miles to marry a man she's never met, a pillar of a dusty frontier town, expecting a life of quiet respectability. But she never counted on him, the other man, a man as wild and unforgiving as the territory itself, a wealthy rancher of Apache blood who looks at her not as a bride-to-be, but as a prize already won. Before her feet even settle in the dust of Redemption Gulch, he makes his claim. They called her a mail-order bride. He called her his. This is the story of a contract, a conflict, and a woman caught between the man who bought her and the man who vowed to own her. The train groaned, a beast of iron and steam, surrendering to the vast sun-scorched expanse of the Arizona Territory. For 3 days, Rosalind Hayes had been its captive, watching the verdant greens of Missouri bleed into the muted ochres and siennas of the West. Each rhythmic clack of the wheels on the track had been a tick of the clock moving her further from the life she'd been forced to abandon, and closer to the one she had purchased with a stamp and a carefully worded letter. Rosalind smoothed the front of her grey travelling dress, the fabric gritty with the fine dust that seeped through every crack in the railcar. She was not a girl prone to flights of fancy. At 24, her world had been one of books, polite society, and the stifling expectations of a family whose name had recently been dragged through the mud of scandal. A scandal not of her making, but one from which she bore the indelible stain. The advertisement in the Matrimonial Gazette had been a lifeline. Wealthy, respected landowner in burgeoning town seeks a wife of good breeding and gentle constitution, object matrimony and companionship. The correspondence with Mr. Alistair Finch of Redemption Gulch had been formal, precise, and devoid of sentiment. It was perfect. A clean slate, a transaction. As the train hissed to a halt, the platform of Redemption Gulch materialized from the shimmering heat. It was less a town and more a raw collection of unpainted wooden buildings huddled against the dust, cowering under a sky of impossibly brilliant blue. A knot of men in battered hats and worn denim paused their business to watch the disembarking passengers, their eyes lingering on her, the only unchaperoned woman. Rosalind tightened her grip on her valise, her chin held high, a practiced mask of composure hiding the tremor in her hands. A man detached himself from the small crowd. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a dark suit and waistcoat, his silvering hair neatly combed. A pearl stickpin gleamed in his cravat, a stark statement of wealth against the town's rustic backdrop. "Miss Hayes." His voice was as crisp and dry as the air. "I am Alistair Finch." "Mr. Finch," she replied, offering a gloved hand. His grasp was brief, his skin cool and dry. There was no warmth in it, only possession. "It is a pleasure to finally make your acquaintance." "The pleasure is mine. Your journey was satisfactory, I trust." He spoke as if inquiring about a shipment of goods. His eyes, the color of faded slate, roamed over her, assessing her posture, her dress, the quality of her luggage. It was an appraisal, not a welcome. A chill snaked down her spine that had nothing to do with the desert evening that was beginning to creep in. "It was long but uneventful," she managed. "Good. Efficiency is a virtue." He gestured towards a buckboard. "My man will take your trunk. The house is prepared for you. We shall be married by the circuit judge on Saturday. All arrangements have been made." All arrangements had been made. The finality of his words landed like a stone in her stomach. This was it. This was her new life, planned and executed with the precision of a business merger. As he turned to speak to the driver, Rosalind's gaze swept across the platform one last time, a silent farewell to her independence. And then she saw him. He stood near the station master's office, separate from the others, yet commanding the space around him, as if by sheer force of will. He wasn't dressed like the dusty cowboys or the town merchants. He wore dark, well-fitting trousers and a simple linen shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal powerfully built forearms, skin the color of rich, sun-warmed copper. His hair was black as a raven's wing, cut shorter than the local fashion, but still thick and untamed. But it was his face, his eyes, that seized her attention and held it captive. His features were a striking blend of sharp angles and fierce intensity, a face that spoke of a heritage rooted in this very soil long before towns like Redemption Gulch had names. He was watching her, not with the leering curiosity of the other men, but with an unnerving, predatory focus. His eyes, dark and piercing, met hers across the dusty expanse, and for a breathtaking moment, the entire world seemed to fall away. There was no judgment in his gaze, no pity, only an intensity so profound, it felt as if he could see past the grey dress and the polite facade to the desperate woman beneath. He saw her, truly saw her, and the recognition was both terrifying and electrifying. Alistair Finch's voice cut through the spell. "Miss Hayes, is something amiss?" Rosalind tore her eyes away, her heart hammering against her ribs. "No, nothing. The sun is just very strong here." "One becomes accustomed to it," Finch said dismissively. As he helped her onto the buckboard, his touch a proprietary pressure on her elbow, he followed her gaze. He saw the man by the station, and his lips thinned into a hard, straight line. A flicker of something cold and hostile passed through his slate-grey eyes. The man, Caelan Blackwood, didn't look away. His gaze shifted from Rosalind to Finch, and a subtle, almost imperceptible challenge passed between them. He gave a slow, deliberate nod, not to Finch, but to Rosalind. It was an acknowledgement, a greeting, and something more, a promise, a claim. As the buckboard lurched forward, kicking up a cloud of red dust, Rosalind chanced one last look over her shoulder. He was still there, a lone, formidable figure against the setting sun. He hadn't moved. He just watched her go, his expression unreadable, but his presence burning itself into her memory. They had called her a mail-order bride, a respectable solution to a society scandal, but the look in that stranger's eyes had called her something else, entirely, something wilder and more dangerous. And in the heart of that dusty, God-forsaken town, Rosalind Hayes felt a terrifying premonition that her carefully arranged future had just been torn to shreds before it had even begun. The house stood at the edge of town, a two-story testament to Alistair Finch's prosperity. It was new, the scent of fresh-cut lumber, still clinging to the air and painted a stark, unforgiving white that seemed to defy the dust. Inside, it was furnished with heavy, dark wood pieces, ordered from a catalogue back east, items chosen for their monetary value rather than comfort or beauty. It was a museum of wealth, not a home. "This will be your domain," Finch announced, gesturing with a sweeping, magnanimous hand at the parlour. The chairs were upholstered in stiff, oppressive velvet, and a grand piano stood silent in the corner, its keys covered. "You will find the housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, to be competent. She has been instructed as to your needs." Rosalind walked through the rooms in a daze. Her bedroom was vast, with a four-poster bed that could have slept a family, and windows that looked out not on the town, but on the endless, intimidating vista of the desert. It felt less like a sanctuary and more like an observation post. Finch had provided everything a wife could materially desire, yet the house felt hollow, devoid of life. It was a gilded cage, and the bars were already closing in. Over the next few days, the reality of her situation settled upon her like a shroud. Finch was a man of routine and control. Breakfast was at 7, dinner was at 6. He expected her to be seated at the table, composed and attentive, ready to listen to his monologues about his financial dealings, the incompetence of the town council, and the lazy nature of his ranch hands. He rarely asked for her opinion, and when she offered one, he would listen with a patronizing smile before dismissing it. He took a particular pleasure in parading her through town. A trip to the mercantile or a stroll down the main street became a display of his newest, most prized acquisition. "Gentlemen," he would say to the merchants and bankers who tipped their hats, "may I present my fiancée, Miss Hayes? She brings a touch of Eastern civility to our humble town." Rosalind would smile a polite, practiced expression that didn't reach her eyes and endure the curious stares. The women of the town were polite but distant, their conversations with her stilted. She was an outsider, a purchased bride, a curiosity. The only person who showed her any genuine warmth was Maeve O'Connell, the fiery Irish woman who ran the town's only respectable boarding house and eatery. "Don't you mind them, dearie," Maeve said one afternoon, as Rosalind was picking out thread at the mercantile. Maeve's face was a roadmap of smiles and sorrows, her red hair pinned in a loose, rebellious bun. "They're just jealous. Finch has been the biggest catch in this territory for 20 years, and none of them could land him. Then you step off the train pretty as a picture." "I am grateful for his generosity." Rosalind said the words tasting like ash in her mouth. Maeve's shrewd blue eyes narrowed. "Generosity and kindness ain't the same horse, Rosalind. You remember that." She leaned closer, her voice dropping. "And you be careful. A man like Finch doesn't buy a songbird to hear it sing. He buys it to keep it in a cage." The warning echoed in Rosalind's mind. She saw the truth of it in the way Finch corrected her posture at dinner, in the way he selected her dresses for the day, in the way his hand on her arm felt less like an affectionate gesture and more like a manacle. It was during one of these staged walks that she saw him again, the man from the station. He was exiting the land office, his stride long and confident. He moved with a liquid grace that was utterly at odds with the stiff, shuffling gaits of the other men on the boardwalk. As he stepped into the street, his eyes found her instantly as if he'd been waiting. This time he was closer. She could see the fine details of his face, a strong jaw, a straight nose, and a faint, thin scar that cut through his left eyebrow, giving him a perpetually dangerous look. Finch's grip on her arm tightened painfully. "Keep your eyes forward, Miss Hayes." His tone was sharp, commanding, but Rosalind couldn't obey. The man, Caelan Blackwood, she had learned his name from town gossip, stopped in the middle of the street. A wagon rumbled past, but he paid it no mind. His focus was entirely on her. He didn't smile, he didn't gesture, he simply looked. But that look spoke volumes. It stripped away Finch's ownership, dismissed his presence entirely. It was a look that said, "You are with the wrong man." "Who is that man?" she asked, her voice, barely a whisper, feigning ignorance. Finch's face hardened. "That is Caelan Blackwood, a half-breed who got lucky with a land inheritance from his white father. He owns the Blackwood Creek Ranch, north of here. He thinks his money makes him a gentleman, but a wolf is a wolf no matter what clothes it wears. You will stay away from him. He is not our kind." The vehemence in Finch's voice was startling. It wasn't just dislike. It was a deep, ingrained hatred, mixed with something that looked remarkably like fear. That night, Rosalind lay awake in the grand empty bed, the moonlight painting silver stripes across the floor. She thought of the life stretching before her, a quiet, orderly existence, at Alistair Finch's side, her days dictated by his whims, her spirit slowly suffocating in this beautiful empty house. Then her mind conjured the image of Caelan Blackwood, the unnerving focus in his eyes, the raw power he projected, without saying a word, the way he looked at her, as if he knew a secret she had yet to discover about herself. She was a mail-order bride, a woman who had traded her freedom for security. But for the first time since arriving in Redemption, Gulch, she felt a flicker of something she thought had been extinguished, a dangerous, rebellious spark of defiance. She was in a cage, yes, but the door was not yet locked, and she had a growing, terrifying suspicion that the wolf outside was the only one who held the key. The week leading up to the Saturday wedding crawled by each day a new lesson in the suffocating nature of Alistair Finch's control. He forbade her from walking in town alone, citing concerns for her safety, but Rosalind knew it was about possession. He didn't want his prize on display without its owner. Her world shrank to the White House and its manicured, sterile garden. Her only reprieve was Mrs. Gable, the stony-faced housekeeper, who on the third day left a tattered copy of Jane Eyre on Rosalind's bedside table without a word. It was a small act of rebellion, a silent acknowledgement of Rosalind's intellectual starvation, and it forged a quiet, unspoken bond between the two women. On Thursday, Finch announced they would be hosting a small dinner party. "It is important," he stated, not asked, "for the town's key figures to see that we are a unified front, that the House of Finch is strong and stable." Rosalind spent the day in a state of nervous tension, overseeing Mrs. Gable's preparations, feeling more like a hired event planner than the future lady of the house. The guests arrived as the sun began to set the mayor, a portly, sweating man named Henderson. The sheriff, Bartholomew Bart Coleman, a man whose weary eyes suggested he'd seen too much and done too little, and the owner of the bank, a man whose deference to Finch was almost painful to watch. She played her part, smiling and making polite conversation, the perfect hostess. She felt like an actress in a play she hadn't auditioned for. As the men settled in the parlor with brandy and cigars after dinner, she excused herself to the veranda for a breath of fresh air, the drone of their self-important conversation fading behind her. The desert air was cool and smelled of dust and distant rain. She leaned against the railing, gazing at the stars that glittered like scattered diamonds on black velvet, feeling a profound sense of loneliness. A beautiful night. The voice came from the shadows at the edge of the porch, startling her. A figure detached itself from the darkness. Caelan Blackwood. Rosalind's heart leapt into her throat. "Mr. Blackwood, what are you doing here?" He was not one of Finch's guests. He would never be. He moved closer, not with menace, but with a quiet confidence that was somehow more disarming. He stopped a respectful few feet from her, but his presence seemed to consume the space between them. "I have business with Finch," he said, his voice a low, smooth baritone. "A dispute over water rights. He prefers to conduct such business after his brandy, when he believes his mind is sharpest." There was a hint of mockery in his tone. "I saw you come out here. You looked like you were suffocating." His directness was a shock. No one in her life had ever spoken to her with such blunt perception. "I was simply getting some air," she said, her voice tighter than she intended. He studied her face in the pale moonlight. "He doesn't suit you, Rosalind Hayes." The sound of her name on his lips was intimate, a claim in itself. "You have no right to say that. You don't know me." "I know what I see." He countered, his gaze intense. "I see a woman with fire in her eyes, trying to convince the world she is made of ice. Finch will douse that fire. He will chip away at the ice until all that is left is a reflection of himself." A tremor ran through her. He was putting voice to the very fears that haunted her sleepless nights. "My arrangement with Mr. Finch is a private matter." "Is that what it is? An arrangement?" He took another step closer. She could smell the scent of leather and the clean, wild scent of the sagebrush plains on him. Some things, Miss Hayes, are not meant to be arranged. They are not lines in a ledger or clauses in a contract. They are matters of the soul. Before she could form a reply, the parlour door opened, spilling yellow light onto the veranda. Alistair Finch stood silhouetted in the doorway. "Blackwood!" Finch's voice was venomously low. "I see you've met my fiancée." Caelan didn't turn to face him immediately. His eyes remained locked on Rosalind's for a fraction of a second longer, a silent, binding promise passing between them. Then he slowly turned. "Finch," he acknowledged, his tone deceptively mild. "I was just telling Miss Hayes that a spirit as vibrant as hers belongs in the open, not locked away in a whitewashed box." Finch's face contorted with fury. He strode onto the porch, placing himself between them, a physical barrier. He grabbed Rosalind's arm, his fingers digging into her flesh like talons. "Miss Hayes's place is with me," Finch snarled. "She is to be my wife. What she needs, I will provide. What she is will be what I decide. She is mine." The word hung in the air, ugly and final. A brand. Caelan's expression remained unreadable, but a dangerous light ignited in his dark eyes. He looked past Finch, directly at Rosalind, his gaze bypassing the man who held her captive. "A man can claim a piece of land with a deed, Finch." Caelan said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying with absolute clarity. "He can claim a horse with a bill of sale, but he can never truly claim a woman's soul. That is something that must be given. And Miss Hayes," he paused, letting the weight of his words settle, "has given you nothing." He held Rosalind's gaze one last time, a look that said more than 1,000 words of courtship ever could. It was a declaration of war, not against Finch, but for her. Then, with a curt, dismissive nod, he turned and melted back into the night, leaving a shattered silence and a furious Alistair Finch in his wake. Finch's grip on her arm became bruising. He dragged her back inside his face, a mask of cold rage. "You will never speak to that man again. Do you understand me? You are my property now. The wedding is on Saturday. After that, you will not forget who you belong to." That night, cowering in her room, Rosalind understood. Caelan Blackwood had not just spoken to her. He had laid down a challenge. Finch had called her his property, a thing to be owned. But Blackwood, with his fierce eyes and even fiercer words, had called her a soul, a spirit. And in doing so, he had staked an unspoken claim, not of ownership, but of recognition. A claim that promised not a cage, but a wild, terrifying freedom she was only just beginning to realize she craved more than security. The battle for Rosalind Hayes had begun. The day after the confrontation on the veranda, a palpable tension filled the White House. Finch was icily silent, his displeasure a constant oppressive presence. He watched Rosalind's every move, his slate-grey eyes filled with suspicion. He had doubled down on her isolation, forbidding her from even sitting on the front porch. Mrs. Gable now brought her meals to her room on a tray, her face a grim, sympathetic mask. Rosalind felt the walls closing in. The wedding was 2 days away. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prick at the edges of her composure. She had to find a way out. But how she had no money of her own, no friends to turn to except Maeve, and involving her seemed a dangerous risk. Late Friday afternoon, driven by a desperate need for a moment's peace, she slipped out to the small study at the back of the house while Finch was at the bank. He rarely used the room, preferring the grander parlour. It was dusty and smelled of old paper and stale cigar smoke. She ran a finger along the spines of the leather-bound books, legal texts, agricultural almanacs, county records. It was the library of a man concerned only with land law and money. Her fingers brushed against a large, heavy ledger, tucked clumsily between two oversized books. Curious, she pulled it out. It wasn't a county record. The front was embossed with a single word, acquisitions. Her heart began to pound. This was Finch's private record. A voice screamed at her to put it back, to not pry, to not invite the whirlwind. But a stronger, more desperate instinct urged her on. With trembling hands, she opened it. The pages were filled with Finch's precise, spidery handwriting. At first it seemed to be a simple accounting of land purchases and livestock sales. But as she turned the pages, she noticed a disturbing pattern. She saw names she recognized from town, small ranchers, farmers, homesteaders. Next to each name was a series of dates and figures, notations of loans from Finch's bank. Then, a few pages later, the same name would appear under a new heading, foreclosure. The properties, the Miller Farm, the Carson Homestead, the Jackson Creek pasture, were all acquired by Finch for a fraction of their worth. It was predatory. He was using his bank as a weapon, extending loans with impossible terms, and seizing the land when the inevitable default occurred. But it was what she found next that made the blood run cold in her veins. Tucked into the back of the ledger was a separate folded document. It was a water rights agreement for Blackwood Creek, the very lifeblood of Kalen Blackwood's ranch. The signature on the document, purportedly belonging to a county official named Lawrence Pike, looked wrong. The ink was slightly different, the slant of the letters not quite uniform. Beneath it was another entry in Finch's ledger, L. Pike, payment for services rendered, $200. It was a forgery. Finch was trying to steal Kalen Blackwood's water. In this arid land that was not just theft, it was a declaration of war, a death sentence for a ranch. Suddenly, 1,000 small, cruel details about Finch clicked into place. His dismissal of the rancher's incompetence, his contempt for anyone not as wealthy as himself, his obsession with acquisition and control. He wasn't just a cold, domineering man. He was a thief, a meticulous, ruthless criminal hiding behind a veneer of civility. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Rosalind's head shot up, her eyes wide with terror. She shoved the ledger back onto the shelf just as the study door swung open. Alistair Finch stood there, his face unreadable. "What are you doing in here?" I was looking for a book," she stammered, her mind racing. "Something to read." His eyes narrowed, sweeping the room. They lingered for a moment on the shelf where she had replaced the ledger. For a terrifying second, she was sure he knew. He knew she had seen his secrets. He took a step into the room, his shadow falling over her. "I have told you," he said, his voice dangerously soft, "that your place is not to wander my house like a restless spirit. Your place is to prepare yourself. Tomorrow you become Mrs. Alistair Finch. You will be a reflection of my status. You will be perfect. That is all you need to concern yourself with." He reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, his touch cold and reptilian. "Do not disappoint me, Rosalind. I do not abide disappointment." He turned and left, closing the door softly behind him. The click of the latch echoed in the silent room like a gunshot. Rosalind sank into a chair, her body trembling uncontrollably. The gilded cage had just become a predator's lair. She wasn't just marrying a controlling man. She was binding herself to a criminal. The fire Kalen Blackwood had seen in her was now a raging inferno of fear and revulsion. There would be no wedding. She could not become the wife of a man like Alistair Finch. Her options had evaporated. Running was no longer just about escaping an unhappy marriage. It was about escaping a man who would crush anyone who got in his way. And now she held his secrets. He would never let her go. Her only hope lay with the one other person in this territory who stood against him. The man Finch was actively trying to destroy. Her decision was made. Tonight, under the cover of darkness, she would run. And she would run straight to the wolf. Night fell on Redemption Gulch, but it brought no peace to the White House. Rosalind sat on the edge of her bed, her traveling valise the same one she'd arrived with, what felt like a lifetime ago, packed with a few essentials, and the worn copy of Jane Eyre. The most important item, however, was not inside the bag. Tucked into the bodice of her dress, the folded forged water rights document was a square of damning evidence against her heart. She had crept back into the study after Finch had left for a final meeting at the bank, her hands shaking as she retrieved the paper. It was her only leverage, her only proof. The house was silent, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, each tick a countdown to her escape or her doom. Mrs. Gable had brought her a meager dinner tray earlier, her eyes filled with a silent, worried question that Rosalind couldn't answer. She could only give the older woman a quick, grateful squeeze of the hand, a farewell that went unsaid. Shortly after 10 o'clock, she heard the front door open and close. Finch was back. He walked down the hall to his own bedroom at the opposite end of the house. Rosalind held her breath, listening. The minutes stretched into an eternity. Finally, the house settled into the deep, quiet rhythm of the night. Now. She slipped off her shoes, holding them in one hand, the valise in the other. Every creak of the floorboards under her stockinged feet sounded like a cannon shot. She moved down the back staircase, the one used by the staff, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The kitchen was dark shapes of pots and pans, rendered as monstrous shadows in the faint moonlight, filtering through the window. The back door was her goal. She reached it, her fingers fumbling with the bolt. It was heavy and stiff. She put her shoulder into it, gritting her teeth as it slid open with a groan of protesting metal. She froze, listening, expecting to hear Finch's footsteps from above. Nothing. Slipping outside the cool night air was a shock to her senses. She didn't dare look back at the White House, her prison. She hurried across the yard, staying in the shadows of the outbuildings, and slipped through the back gate. The town was dark, save for the yellow, rowdy glow of the saloon at the far end of the street. She had asked Maeve O'Connell once, in a moment of feigned casualness, for the location of the Blackwood Creek Ranch. 10 miles north, Maeve had said, her eyes sharp. A long walk for a woman in a good dress. A long walk was an understatement. It was a pilgrimage, a desperate flight into the unknown. She stayed to the back alleys, her heart pounding with every dog's bark, every rustle in the sagebrush. The lights of Redemption Gulch slowly receded behind her until she was alone on a dark, dusty road under a canopy of indifferent stars. The wilderness that had seemed so intimidating from her window was now a terrifying living entity. The howl of a distant coyote sent a shiver of primal fear down her spine. The landscape was a world of grey and black, every rock and cactus a potential threat. Twice she stumbled, scraping her hands and tearing the hem of her dress. But she pushed on, driven by the image of Finch's cold face and the secrets hidden in his ledger. Hours passed. Her legs ached, her throat was parched, and the initial surge of adrenaline had given way to a bone-deep exhaustion. Doubt began to creep in. What was she doing running to a man she barely knew? A man the whole town feared. A man who had looked at her with a possessiveness that was different from Finch's, but no less potent. What if he turned her away? What if he thought she was mad? Just as despair threatened to overwhelm her, she saw it. Up ahead, a faint, flickering light. A lamp in a window. As she drew closer, she could make out the dark, sprawling shapes of ranch buildings against the horizon, a main house, a bunkhouse corrals, the Blackwood Creek Ranch, Relief and terror warred within her. She had made it. This was the point of no return. She approached the main house, a long, low structure built of dark wood and riverstone. It looked as if it had grown from the land itself, solid and enduring. A dog started barking a deep, menacing sound. A light appeared in another window, and the front door opened. A man stood silhouetted against the lamplight, a rifle held loosely in his hands. It wasn't Kalen. This man was older, his build wiry. "State your business," he called out, his voice rough. Rosalind stopped, her breath catching in her throat. I need to see Mr. Blackwood. It's urgent." The man squinted into the darkness. "It's the middle of the night, ma'am. Who's asking?" "My name is Rosalind Hayes." There was a moment of stunned silence. The man, a ranch hand named Samuel Rivers, as she would later learn, lowered his rifle slightly. He had clearly heard of her. "Wait here." He disappeared back inside. The seconds felt like hours. Rosalind stood alone in the yard, exposed and vulnerable, the barking dog her only companion. She wrapped her arms around herself, trembling from cold and fear. Finally, the door opened again. Kalen Blackwood stood there. He was wearing only a pair of dark trousers, his chest and feet bare. The lamplight behind him carved his powerful physique from the shadows. His face was a thunderous mask of shock and disbelief. He stared at her torn dress, her scratched hands, her exhausted, desperate face. He strode towards her, covering the distance in 3 long, urgent steps. He stopped directly in front of her, his presence overwhelming. "Hayes," he said, his voice a rough whisper. "What in God's name happened? Did he hurt you?" The question was laced with a barely controlled violence. Tears she hadn't even realized she was holding back began to stream down her face. All the fear, the exhaustion, the terror of the past few days came pouring out. She couldn't speak. She could only reach into her dress, her fingers closing around the folded paper. She pulled it out and held it up to him, her hand shaking so badly he had to steady it with his own. His touch was warm and firm, a stark contrast to Finch's cold grasp. His skin on hers sent a jolt through her weary body. He took the document, his eyes scanning it in the moonlight. His expression hardened, the muscles in his jaw clenching as he recognized the forgery, the blatant attempt to ruin him. He looked from the paper back to her face, and his eyes softened with a dawning, fierce understanding. He knew without her having to say a word what this had cost her. He knew the risk she had taken. "You were never going to marry him, were you?" he said, more a statement than a question. "No," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I can't. I won't." He carefully folded the document and tucked it into his pocket. Then, without a word, he reached out, scooped her into his arms as if she weighed nothing, and carried her towards the light and warmth of the house. As he crossed the threshold, he kicked the door shut behind them, closing out the night and the world. In that moment, Rosalind knew she had traded one gilded cage for the den of a wolf. But as he held her safe and secure against his chest, she realized with startling clarity that she had never felt more free. The interior of Kalen's ranch house was nothing like Finch's sterile mansion. It was a space built for living, not for show. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, worn leather chairs were gathered around it, and shelves overflowed with books on everything from engineering to poetry. The air smelled of wood smoke, coffee, and leather. It was warm, real, and masculine. Kalen set her down gently in one of the large chairs by the hearth. He disappeared for a moment and returned with a blanket which he draped around her trembling shoulders and a cup of steaming, heavily sweetened coffee. "Drink," he commanded softly. "Then tell me everything." As the warmth of the coffee seeped into her, Rosalind recounted the story, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. She told him about the ledger, the predatory loans, and the forged document she now held. She described Finch's cold rage and the suffocating control that had become her life. Kaelin listened without interruption, his dark eyes fixed on her face. He sat opposite her, leaning forward, his forearms resting on his knees, his entire being focused on her words. He was a man of stillness, but it was the stillness of a predator, coiled and ready. When she finished, a long, tense silence filled the room. "He won't just let you go," Kaelin said, finally, his voice flat and hard. "When he finds you're gone, he'll come looking. And when he finds you here, he'll bring the law with him. He'll paint you as a hysterical female, a thief who stole his property. The document," she said, her voice stronger now, "it's proof. It's his word against ours," Kaelin countered. "He owns the sheriff. Bart Coleman is a weak man who values his pension more than justice." He stood up and began to pace in front of the fireplace, the firelight flickering across his bare chest. "But Finch made a mistake. He underestimated you. And now—" He stopped and looked at her, a grim smile touching his lips. "He's going to have to deal with me." The sun had barely begun to crest the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and fiery orange, when the sound of approaching horses shattered the morning's peace. Kaelin was already dressed, standing by the window. "He's here," he said calmly. "And he brought Coleman and a few of his hired guns." Rosalind's stomach twisted into a knot of fear. "What are we going to do? Stay inside, stay away from the windows," he ordered. He picked up a Winchester rifle that was leaning against the wall, checking the action with an practiced ease. "Sam!" he called out. His wiry foreman, Samuel Rivers, appeared from a back room, a shotgun in his hands. The two men exchanged a look of complete understanding. This was a battle they had been expecting. Kaelin walked out onto the porch, Rosalind watching fearfully from the shadows of the doorway. Alistair Finch sat astride a fine black horse, his face a mask of incandescent rage. Beside him, Sheriff Coleman looked profoundly uncomfortable. Two rough-looking men, one of whom Rosalind recognized as a brutish enforcer named Lyle Hobbs, flanked them, their hands resting on their pistols. "Blackwood!" Finch shouted, his voice cracking with fury. "You have something that belongs to me. Send out the woman." Kaelin leaned his rifle against the porch post, an act of casual defiance. "The lady is a guest in my home, Finch. She's not going anywhere." "She is my betrothed," Finch spat. "She fled in the night like a common thief. I demand you release her to my custody." "Demand?" Kaelin's voice was dangerously soft, yet it carried across the yard with chilling clarity. "You are in no position to make demands. Miss Hayes came here of her own free will, seeking protection from a criminal." Finch laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "A criminal sheriff, you hear this? This half-breed is making baseless accusations to cover his own thievery." Sheriff Coleman cleared his throat, shifting in his saddle. "Blackwood, the law is on Mr. Finch's side here. A contract was made. You need to let me speak with the lady." "The lady has nothing to say to you, Bart," Kaelin said, his eyes narrowing. "But she did bring me a very interesting piece of paper." Kaelin reached into his coat and produced the forged water rights document. He held it up. "Recognize this, Finch? Your attempt to steal my water and ruin my ranch. Signed by a county official who I found out last year can't even write his own name. An illiterate man doesn't suddenly develop a signature as elegant as yours, does he?" Finch's face went white. Sheriff Coleman stared at the paper, his face a mixture of shock and dawning horror. "It's a lie," Finch blustered, but the confidence had gone from his voice. "A fabrication." "Is it?" Kalen continued, his voice relentless. Miss Hayes also told me about your little ledger, the one you call acquisitions, the one detailing how you've been bleeding the good people of this territory dry for years, creating debt just so you can foreclose on their land. I imagine a few of those families would be very interested to hear about that. They might even be interested enough to form a little committee and pay a visit to your bank. A murmur went through Finch's hired guns. They were paid thugs, not men willing to die for a discovered cheat. Lyle Hobbs looked uncertainly at his employer. "Sheriff," Finch pleaded, turning to Coleman, his composure finally cracking. "Are you going to let him slander me? Arrest him?" Sheriff Coleman looked from Finch's panicked face to Kalen's stony, resolute one. He saw the damning paper in Kalen's hand and the truth in his eyes. He saw the years of Finch's bullying and control, and he saw his own complicity. In that moment, Bart Coleman made a choice. "Alistair," the sheriff said, his voice heavy with resignation. "Forgery is a federal crime, and if what he says about that ledger is true, I think you'd best come back to town with me. We have a lot to talk about." "You work for me," Finch shrieked, his mask of civility completely gone, revealing the snarling, desperate man beneath. "I own you?" "Not anymore," Coleman said quietly. He turned his horse. "It's over, Alistair." For a moment, it looked as if Finch might draw his weapon. His hand hovered over the pistol at his belt. But then he saw Kalen, who had silently picked up his rifle, the barrel now leveled squarely at Finch's chest. He saw the cold, deadly promise in Kalen's eyes. He saw his two hired guns subtly backing their horses away. He was alone. Defeated, Finch's shoulders slumped. The power that had defined him had vanished into the morning air. Without another word, he turned his horse and, flanked by a newly resolute Sheriff Coleman, rode away from the Blackwood Creek Ranch, a broken man riding toward his own reckoning. Rosalind stepped out onto the porch as the dust settled. The sun was fully up now, bathing the valley in a clean, golden light. Kalen turned to her, the rifle still in his hand, his face unreadable. The battle was over. Her past was over. A new, terrifying and uncertain future stretched out before her. In the days that followed the confrontation, Redemption Gulch was a town turned upside down. News of Alistair Finch's crimes spread like a wildfire. The ledger which Sheriff Coleman confiscated from the White House under Kalen's watchful eye was a bomb that shattered Finch's empire. Families who had lost their land found their voices, and the bank was placed under territorial administration. Finch himself, stripped of his wealth, and power disappeared one night, slipping away before a federal marshal could arrive. Some said he went to Mexico. Others said he simply vanished into the desert. No one much cared. His reign was over. Rosalind remained at the Blackwood Creek Ranch. Kalen had given her a comfortable room, insisting she take all the time she needed to decide her next move. A strange, quiet courtesy developed between them. They ate their meals together, often in a comfortable silence, speaking of neutral topics, books, the weather, the workings of the ranch. He never pressed her, never presumed. The fierce possessiveness she had seen in his eyes at the train station had been banked, replaced by a deep, watchful respect. He was a complex man. She saw his shrewd business mind as he dealt with cattle buyers, his quiet authority with his men, and a surprising gentleness as he tended to a sick foal. He was nothing like the savage Finch had described. He was a man of two worlds, with the education of his white father and the soul of his Apache mother, a man who belonged wholly to the land he commanded. Rosalind, in turn, began to heal. The fresh air and hard work of the ranch were a balm to her spirit. She found herself helping in the kitchen, mending clothes with the ranch hands' wives, and discovering a strength and resilience within herself she never knew she possessed. The pale, frightened woman from the east was slowly being burned away by the Arizona sun, revealing someone stronger, surer. One evening, about a week after Finch's departure, she found Kaylin by the corrals, staring out at the mountains as they turned purple in the twilight. "The stagecoach leaves for Santa Fe on Tuesday," she said, her voice steady. "I've been told there's a school there that may need a teacher." Kaylin didn't turn to look at her, but she saw the muscles in his shoulders tense. "Is that what you want?" he asked, his voice low. "To go back to teaching children their letters? I want a life of my own making," she replied honestly. "I came here to escape a scandal and found myself in a trap. You freed me from that trap. Kaylin and I will be forever grateful, but I cannot trade one keeper for another." At this, he turned to face her. His dark eyes searched her face in the fading light. "Did you ever think," he said softly, "that I didn't see a woman who needed a keeper? That I saw a woman who needed a partner?" He took a step closer. "When I saw you on that platform, I didn't see a delicate flower. I saw a fighter. I saw a woman with a fire inside her that this whole dusty territory couldn't extinguish. Finch wanted to own you, to put you under glass. I wanted to see you run free." Rosalind's heart, which she had guarded so fiercely, began to beat a little faster. "You said I was yours." "My words were for him," Kaylin corrected gently. "A challenge. A warning to a man who saw you as a possession. What I felt, what I feel, is something else. It is not about ownership. It is about recognition. My soul recognized yours, Rosalind Hayes. It's as simple and as complicated as that." He reached out, not to grab her, but to gently cup her chin, his thumb stroking her cheek. His touch was electric warm with a sincerity that melted the last of her defenses. "I don't have a whitewashed mansion to offer you," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I have this: the land, the hard work, the freedom. I don't want a docile wife to sit in my parlor. I want a queen to ride by my side. Build this life with me, Rosalind. Not as a bride I ordered, but as the woman you choose to be. Be my partner. Be my equal. Be mine not because I claim you, but because you choose me." Tears welled in Rosalind's eyes, but they were not tears of fear or sadness. They were tears of profound, overwhelming relief. This was the choice she had never been given. This was the freedom she had only dreamed of. She looked past him at the vast, wild land stretching out to the horizon. It was no longer an intimidating alien landscape. It was home. It was her future. "They called me a mail-order bride." She whispered, a small smile playing on her lips as she looked back into his intense, waiting eyes. "And what do you call yourself?" he asked. "Free," she said, and leaning forward, she closed the distance between them and sealed her choice with a kiss, a promise made, not under contract, but under the vast, starlit sky of a land that was finally hers. And so Rosalind Hayes, the woman who arrived in a dusty town as a mail-order bride, found her destiny not in a contract of convenience, but in an act of courage. She discovered that true freedom isn't about escaping your past, but about having the strength to choose your future. Her story and Kaylin Blackwood's became a quiet legend in the territory, a tale of how a fierce heart refused to be caged, and how a wild soul recognized its equal. They proved that love isn't about ownership, but about a partnership forged in respect-defiance and the unforgiving beauty of the Wild West. If this story of strength, passion, and redemption resonated with you, please show your support. Hit that like button, share it with someone who loves a story where the hero is the master of her own fate, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more tales from the untamed frontier.